Let's start by zooming out and asking a fundamental question. Who actually shapes healthcare today? At first glance, you might say, well, it's the doctor or the hospital or maybe even the government. And sure, those are key players. But when we really look at how modern healthcare operates, it becomes clear that it's not just one person or one group driving decisions. Healthcare is now a dynamic, interconnected ecosystem, a living system with multiple stakeholders, each bringing their own interests, expectations, and influence to the table. Now, why does this matter to you as someone in medical affairs? Because if you're going to be effective, not just operationally, but strategically, you need to understand this ecosystem deeply. You need to know how decisions are made, who holds the power in different scenarios, what drives their behavior, and how they measure success. Whether you're engaging with a key opinion leader, preparing for a payer interaction, or supporting a policy-shaping discussion, your impact will depend on how well you understand the bigger picture. Think of this ecosystem like a chessboard. If you only focus on the piece you're moving, let's say a product or a publication, you'll miss the game. You need to anticipate moves, understand your position, and recognize what others are trying to achieve. This is what separates good medical affairs work from truly strategic medical affairs leadership. In this module, we'll walk through each stakeholder, their roles, their unmet needs, and more importantly, how we in medical affairs can add value that aligns with their priorities. Because ultimately, your success in this field isn't just about what you know, it's about how strategically you apply that knowledge in the real-world healthcare landscape. Now that we've introduced the idea of a healthcare ecosystem, let's talk about why this understanding is absolutely critical for you in medical affairs. You see, medical affairs is uniquely positioned at the intersection of science, strategy, and stakeholder engagement. You're not just disseminating data or responding to requests, you're translating complex science into real-world value. And that translation, it only works if you understand who you're talking to, what they care about, and why it matters to them. Think about it. A clinical trial outcome might excite an academic investigator, but a payer will immediately ask, how does this impact cost or reduce hospitalizations? A regulator may be concerned with safety signals, while a patient advocacy group might zero in on quality of life metrics. Each player sees the same data through a completely different lens. Your role is to anticipate these perspectives and tailor your communication accordingly. This is where strategic thinking comes into play. When you're developing your medical strategy or an engagement plan, you shouldn't start with the tactics. What webinar should I do? What MSL deck should we create? Instead, start by asking, who are the stakeholders I need to influence? What outcomes are they trying to achieve? And where does our science fit into that? If you want to drive cross-functional alignment, support access, or inform public health decisions, you have to step out of the silos. Your ability to navigate the healthcare ecosystem directly impacts the credibility, reach, and long-term success of your medical initiatives. So this isn't just theoretical. This is foundational. If you're in medical affairs and you're not thinking strategically about the ecosystem, you're missing the opportunity to lead. All right, now let's start building a clearer picture of this ecosystem, starting with the core players. These are the stakeholders you'll encounter most frequently in your role and whose influence often determines whether a product is prescribed, reimbursed, or even accessible. First up, we have patients and caregivers. No matter how far upstream we are in strategy or evidence generation, everything we do eventually impacts real people living with health conditions. Patients today are not just passive recipients of care. They're informed, engaged, and increasingly vocal about their expectations. Caregivers, too, are essential partners in treatment decisions, particularly in chronic and rare diseases. Then we have healthcare professionals, or HCPs. They're often considered the scientific and clinical voice of the system. They make daily treatment decisions, participate in trials, educate peers, and provide feedback to industry. But their needs go far beyond product brochures. They want peer-reviewed evidence, clinical relevance, and genuine partnership. Next, payers and insurers. Their influence is growing rapidly. In many markets, if a treatment isn't reimbursed or doesn't align with value frameworks, it simply won't be used, regardless of how strong the clinical data is. Payers demand evidence that shows both effectiveness and efficiency, real-world outcomes, economic impact, and budget implications. And finally, we have regulators and policymakers. These are the gatekeepers of safety, quality, and public trust. Whether it's the FDA, EMA, local health authorities, or ministries of health, their role is to ensure that products on the market meet stringent standards. Their influence goes beyond approval. They also shape the direction of innovation and access through policies and health priorities. These four groups, patients, HCPs, payers, and regulators, are the pillars of the healthcare ecosystem. If you understand what drives them, you can start aligning your strategy to deliver value that's not just scientific, but also relevant, credible, and impactful. Up next, we'll talk about the emerging and less traditional players who are starting to shape the ecosystem in big ways. Now, we've just covered the core players, but let's not stop there, because the healthcare ecosystem is evolving. And to think strategically, we need to keep an eye on emerging and peripheral stakeholders, those whose influence is growing fast, even if they're not traditionally at the center of drug development or access decisions. First on that list are provider institutions, hospitals, integrated health systems, and academic medical centers. They're not just places where care is delivered. Many now function as research hubs, innovation drivers, and key decision makers when it comes to formulary access, pathway design, and digital health adoption. A hospital group can decide whether a therapy is used system-wide. That's major influence. Next, we have health technology and data companies. Yes, companies like Apple, Google Health, or smaller health tech startups offering wearables, AI tools, or patient apps. These players are shaping how data is collected, shared, and interpreted. They're transforming how patients monitor their conditions and how physicians track outcomes. They're not just service providers, they're fast becoming strategic collaborators in evidence generation and patient engagement. Then come advocacy groups and NGOs. You might think of them as awareness champions, and they are, but their influence now goes far beyond that. They help shape research priorities. They advocate for funding. And in many cases, they're sitting at the table with regulators, giving voice to patient needs in HTA and policy decisions. And don't underestimate the power of media, influencers, and the public at large. In today's world, a single tweet or news story can influence public trust, drive regulatory scrutiny, or even spark new research funding. Social media has turned healthcare into a very public space. Public opinion can indirectly affect prescribing, access, and even the perception of scientific credibility. Now, as medical affairs professionals, we might not engage with all of these groups directly every day, but our strategies should absolutely consider them. Because influence isn't always formal, and in today's healthcare environment, ignoring these emerging voices could mean missing early signals, or worse, becoming irrelevant. So keep your radar wide. Strategic thinkers know that sometimes the most unexpected players are the ones who shift the system the most. Let's now go deeper starting with the patient and caregiver segment, which really should be the heart of every medical strategy. Now, we often say, put the patient at the center. It's a nice phrase, but what does it really mean in practice? First, patients need access to affordable, effective, and safe treatment. That's obvious. But it's not just about receiving medication. It's about accessing it without overwhelming financial stress, without long delays, and with full confidence in its safety and efficacy. For many patients, especially those with rare or chronic conditions, navigating access is a major hurdle, something we can and should support strategically. Next, they need transparent and understandable communication. Let's be honest, our scientific materials are often filled with jargon. But for a patient who's just been diagnosed with cancer, or a caregiver managing a loved one's Alzheimer's treatment, they're not reading a journal article. They want clarity, empathy, and relevance. That means we need to translate our data into language that resonates with real people's lives, without oversimplifying the science. Another need is inclusion in decision making. Patients today want a seat at the table. That might be in clinical trial design, feedback on treatment guidelines, or involvement in shared decision making at the point of care. They expect to be treated as informed partners, not passive participants. And from a medical affairs standpoint, involving patient voices early on strengthens the relevance of our evidence and the trust in our outcomes. And finally, patients and caregivers need support in navigating complex systems, whether that's reimbursement, clinical trials, or chronic disease management. We're talking about real-world burdens like travel, waiting times, language barriers, and digital literacy gaps. We might not be able to solve all of them, but we can design our programs, materials, and evidence generation efforts with these pain points in mind. Caregivers, meanwhile, often carry an invisible load. They juggle appointments, manage medications, and provide emotional and physical support. They need recognition, tools, and resources tailored for them, not just for the patient. So when we talk about strategy in medical affairs, the patient isn't a checkbox. They're a living reality. And if we don't truly understand their world, we can't claim to be building solutions that matter. Now let's shift from patient needs to patient expectations, because they're not the same thing. Needs are often based on what's missing or challenging in their experience. Expectations, on the other hand, reflect what patients believe pharmaceutical companies, and medical affairs in particular, should be delivering. So what do they expect from us? First, there's a clear demand for education and tools that are truly patient-centric. That means providing information that is not just medically accurate, but also tailored to the patient's literacy level, cultural context, and emotional state. Think about it. Someone newly diagnosed with multiple sclerosis doesn't just need a mechanism of action diagram. They need to understand what life will look like tomorrow, next year, and 5 years from now. They expect us to support them through that journey with resources that empower, not overwhelm. Second, patients expect involvement in the drug development process, especially in clinical trials. Gone are the days when trials were designed solely by researchers, for researchers. Today's patients want a voice in defining endpoints, designing protocols, and ensuring that the experience of participating in a study is humane and accessible. They expect transparency. Why this trial? Why these visits? Why those exclusion criteria? Another key expectation is that pharma delivers real-world outcomes that actually reflect what patients value. And here's where medical affairs plays a pivotal role. We need to move beyond just survival curves and p-values. Patients care about how a treatment affects their daily function, mental well-being, ability to work, and participate in family life. They expect us to collect and share those data points. because those are the ones that matter to them. And let's not forget empathy. This one's harder to measure, but easy to feel. Patients and caregivers expect us to speak like humans, not institutions. They want transparency when things go wrong, humility when we don't have all the answers, and compassion in how we communicate, especially around serious or life-limiting conditions. At the end of the day, expectations are rising. Patients are more empowered, more informed, and more connected than ever before. And if we want to meet them where they are, we need to elevate our mindset from compliance-driven to connection-driven. Medical affairs is uniquely positioned to lead this evolution, but only if we listen, genuinely, consistently, and strategically. Let's now turn our attention to a stakeholder group that many of us in medical affairs interact with regularly: healthcare professionals, or HCPs. Now, it's tempting to assume we already know what they need: information about our product, scientific publications, maybe some slide decks or clinical trial updates. But the reality is more nuanced and increasingly demanding. So what do HCPs truly need from us? First and foremost, they need timely, accurate, and clinically relevant data. That's the baseline. But it's not just about data quantity, it's about context. How does this data help them treat their next patient? What's different about this result compared to what they're already doing? Physicians are under enormous time pressure, and they expect data that is immediately applicable, not buried in jargon or promotional fluff. Next, HCPs need unbiased scientific dialogue. This is where medical affairs shines. HCPs don't want to be sold to. They want to have two-way conversations. They want to challenge the data, ask tough questions, and hear our scientific perspective, not our marketing talking points. They value authenticity, especially when it's clear that we're there to share knowledge, not to push an agenda. Third, they're looking for peer collaboration and networking opportunities. Many clinicians value the ability to learn from colleagues through roundtables, advisory boards, or even informal discussions. As medical affairs, we can facilitate those exchanges, connecting physicians with others facing similar patient populations or therapeutic dilemmas. Creating those peer-to-peer bridges is often more valuable than any monologue we deliver. And finally, they need practical tools that help improve patient care. That might be in the form of diagnostic algorithms, treatment pathways, dosing calculators, or case-based learning modules. HCPs appreciate support that simplifies complexity without sacrificing accuracy. When we deliver tools that work in the real world, not just in theory, we become partners in care, not just conveyors of data. So here's the bottom line. HCPs are scientists, yes, but they're also problem solvers. They need insights that help them make better decisions, faster. And they need partners who understand the pressures they're under. If we can deliver value through clarity, credibility, and collaboration, we not only earn their trust, we earn their time. And that is a currency you can't buy. So we've just explored what healthcare professionals need. But what about the expectations from us, specifically from medical affairs? Let's be clear. Expectations are evolving. HCPs today are far more discerning, and their interactions with medical affairs teams are no longer a nice to have. They're a professional standard, but only if those interactions are meaningful. First, HCPs expect us to engage in peer-level scientific dialogue. This is critical. They don't want promotional messaging repackaged as medical education. They want to feel they are speaking to someone who truly understands the science, the clinical implications, and the challenges they face at the bedside. They expect depth. If they're talking to a medical science liaison or a medical advisor, they want a discussion, not a scripted message. Second, They look to us to deliver educational initiatives tailored to their specialty and context. Generic content won't cut it. A cardiologist managing comorbid diabetes doesn't want the same material as a diabetologist managing heart failure risk. HCPs expect tailored, data-rich, and interactive formats, be it live webinars, micro-learning modules, or scientific symposia. And they expect these initiatives to add value to their continuing education, not just serve our objectives. Third, HCPs want support in translating science into clinical practice. They want help in navigating complex treatment algorithms, new guideline updates, and real-world application of trial data. It's one thing to present a hazard ratio from a study, it's another to help the physician understand how that translates to the patient they're seeing tomorrow morning. When medical affairs bridges that gap, we become true partners in care. And finally, HCPs expect partnership in advancing standards of care. They want to be involved in shaping clinical trials, contributing to treatment guidelines, and generating data that reflects real patient needs. They expect us to respect their insights, collaborate on meaningful initiatives, and involve them early, not just when a product is ready to launch. To summarize, medical affairs is no longer seen as a supporting function. It's a strategic one. HCPs are watching how we show up. And when we bring scientific rigor, clinical empathy, and co-creation to the table, we're not just meeting expectations, we're setting new ones. Now let's talk about one of the most influential and often most misunderstood stakeholders in the healthcare ecosystem, payers and insurers. For many years, we in medical affairs were more focused on HCPS and regulators. But times have changed. Today, payers play a defining role in whether a therapy succeeds or fails in the real world. And if we don't understand what they need, we risk creating brilliant science that never gets used. So what exactly do payers need? First and foremost, they need evidence of clinical and economic value, not just efficacy in a controlled trial, but effectiveness in the real world. They're asking, does this treatment improve outcomes in my insured population? Is it worth the cost compared to the standard of care? That's why we need to bring forward budget impact models, cost effectiveness data, and head-to-head comparisons early and in formats they can use. Think about it this way. Payers are managing populations, not individual patients. Their perspective is macro, and their priorities are long-term sustainability and value for money. They also need predictability. Payers want to know how a new intervention will affect their system. Will it reduce hospitalizations? Will it increase specialist referrals? What kind of patients are most likely to benefit? This is where real-world evidence, observational studies, and health economics all come into play. And it's medical affairs, not commercial, who is best positioned to provide this. And let's not forget population-level insights. Payers are not just looking at one disease, they're evaluating trends across demographics, comorbidities, and care pathways. They expect data that's integrated, comprehensive, and aligned with broader health system goals, like reducing readmissions or improving preventive care. So here's the takeaway. If your medical plan doesn't include a payer-informed evidence strategy, you're operating with blind spots. Because no matter how scientifically sound a product is, if the payer doesn't see the value, the therapy won't reach the patient. Medical affairs teams today must think like payers, speak their language, and build data that answers their questions, not just ours. So now that we understand what payers need, let's take it a step further and look at what they actually expect from pharmaceutical companies, and more specifically, from medical affairs. And I'll tell you up front, the bar is higher than ever. First, payers expect early dialogue, not after regulatory approval, not during launch planning, but well before. They want visibility into the pipeline, especially for high-cost or first-in-class innovations. They expect us to engage early with transparent, data-driven conversations about how these innovations might fit into current treatment paradigms. They're asking, what's coming? And how are you preparing to demonstrate its value in my setting? This is a shift. We're not just responding to access challenges anymore. We're being expected to co-shape the evidence plans that will make or break those access decisions. Second, payers are increasingly demanding evidence beyond randomized controlled trials. RCTs are important, of course, but they often represent ideal conditions, not the real world. Payers want to see how your product performs outside of the clinical trial bubble, in community clinics, with diverse patient populations, and in comorbid settings. They expect real-world data, pragmatic trials, and registries that reflect the messy reality of clinical practice. Third, they want value frameworks that align with their system priorities. That means understanding how they define cost-effectiveness. Is it based on QALYs, budget impact, resource utilization? Each payer system is different. What works in the UK may not work in Saudi Arabia or Brazil. Medical affairs must understand these nuances and frame evidence accordingly. One-size-fits-all value stories simply don't work anymore. And finally, there's a growing expectation around ongoing partnership and transparency. Payers don't want a one-time value dossier and then silence. They expect regular updates, post-marketing evidence, safety signals, and outcome data. If they're going to commit resources to reimbursing a therapy, they expect to be part of the long-term evidence journey. So here's the bottom line. Payers are strategic partners. They expect us to respect their role, anticipate their questions, and co-develop value that matters, not just to patients, but to systems. For medical affairs, this is both a challenge and an opportunity, because the more we show up as scientific partners, not commercial proxies, the more trust we build. And trust is what opens doors. Let's pause here. We've covered a lot of ground already, looking closely at patients, HCPs, payers, and now exploring their evolving expectations from medical affairs and the broader pharmaceutical industry. And as you've seen, each of these stakeholders is not just important, they're essential. They influence access, shape perceptions, and ultimately decide whether your scientific work makes it to the people who need it most. But here's the thing. We're only halfway through the healthcare ecosystem. To do justice to the remaining players, like regulators, policymakers, hospital systems, tech innovators, and advocacy groups, we need to give them the same level of attention. And if we try to cram it all into one tutorial, we risk rushing through what really matters. So we're going to split this lesson into two parts. In the next tutorial, we'll pick up exactly where we left off, starting with policymakers and regulators, and continue building your strategic lens around the rest of the ecosystem. We'll also wrap it up with cross-stakeholder alignment and a set of actionable takeaways you can apply immediately in your role. Because this isn't just theory, it's the foundation of how medical affairs leaders think, plan, and lead with impact. So, take a break. Let the insights settle. And when you're ready, join me for part 2 of this session on the healthcare ecosystem. You won't want to miss it.